In the very first section of chapter 6, of the very first section, at the very beginning, we talked about characteristics of a quality lesson. We had those 8 characteristics. Then the second section or second part of chapter 6 was all about the essential elements that you need to incorporate in your instruction. And that's when we concluded with closure and we completed all 11 parts. Now on the third section or third part of chapter 6, we're going to talk about providing instructional feedback. Providing instructional feedback. I want you to know that much of the feedback that you are going to deliver to your students in PE is going to be corrective, focusing on rectifying or improving their performance. Because they're not supposed to be able to do it. You're showing them. Some will get it, but maybe the majority won't. So you're going to have corrective feedback. You're going to help them learn and improve. Just be careful. You want to avoid negative feedback. You want to focus on constructive and not be destructive. You want to focus on positive student performance. That saying something like that was a poor throw, let's try a little harder, that's negative. We want to stay away from that. So I want you to know overusing corrective feedback creates a climate where the students worry about making errors for fear that you will embarrass or belittle them. So we don't want to overuse corrective feedback. We got to be careful with it. So I like this next statement. This is what you want to do. I want you to know this. A general rule of thumb is this. You want to do a 4-to-1 ratio. You want to do 4 positive statements to the student about what they're doing. 4 positive ones. And 1 corrective. Followed by 1 corrective. That will enhance their learning and get them to stay motivated. So a 4-to-1 ratio, 4 positives, then come up with 1 corrective. When you're giving feedback, you want meaningful feedback statements. Teachers often develop positive yet habitual patterns. Nice job, good job, way to go, much better, way to hustle. They have very little specific information and they're habitual in nature. How many of us have counted how many times your teacher has said, yeah, or some little saying, and it's habitual when we're bored, or a priest or pastor or someone giving a speech. So be careful with it and notice that about yourself. These general comments offer very little specific information or value, so we want to add specific information, and that'll help to improve the behavior of the students. So I want you to know that adding specific information or value to feedback improves the desired student behavior. Improves the desired student behavior. What is an example of specific positive feedback with value content that I want you to know? Excellent catch. You bent your elbows while catching, which created a soft home for the ball. You taught that, and they did it. You gave them a big compliment, excellent catch, and then you were specific by saying the bending of the elbow, soft home, receipt. That's positive or value content. Another issue about feedback that you need to realize, you want to distribute it evenly to all the students systematically, assuming that there's no major discipline problems occurring. It always keeps the students on task if they know that you are moving around and kind of watching everybody on a regular basis. So what do? I want you to know, after you deliver your instructional feedback to a student, you tell them a little something. You're talking to them to help them to be successful or to learn how to do that particular skill. Don't stay there. You want to move on to another student or another quadrant. We talked about that, another area, and let the student practice without you observing. Now, you may glance back when the student can't see you and you can see that that student is working on it, but don't expect them to correct it immediately. That's almost humanly impossible. To change their skill performance, it's going to take time, and they're going to have to repeat it and over again. Repetition, this is how we learn. So observe them carefully, give them some feedback, and move on, and then recheck their progress later. Effective feedback is often, or feedback in general, is often group oriented, but the entire class is receiving it, but how do you know every student interpreted it the way you meant it to be? It leaves a lot of room for misinterpretation. So when you give individual feedback, you want to make sure you do it privately, and that's where the positive comes in, so that you're not humiliating the student by directing a negative or corrective feedback to them, but you, in public, you're doing it in a quiet setting, in a one-on-one setting where everyone else doesn't hear. I want you to know you need to focus your feedback on the desired refinement of the task. What do you want to change up, or what needs to be worked on by the student? Focus that feedback on whatever refinement you want them to do. What do you need for them to change in order for them to be successful? They might be trying to learn how to throw a ball. They might be trying to learn how to kick a soccer ball. They might be trying to learn how to dribble in basketball. So what specific refinement or change that you want them to be able to do? So focus that feedback on that desired refinement of the actual task. I also want you to know you need to offer feedback to the students as soon as possible. Immediate, as soon as possible after a correct performance. Okay? Then what about nonverbal feedback? I want you to know nonverbal feedback is effective because students usually interpret it easily and often view it as meaning more than words. What is some nonverbal feedback? You might not mean to, but you might have a frown on your face a lot. Or how do you interpret it when somebody puts their hands on their hips? Showing the number 1 or a thumbs up or a high five. These can be encouraging, and these are nonverbal feedback. So you need to be careful, though, and find out about the customs of the area that you're teaching. What if you move away from southern Louisiana? The Laotian children, when they put their hands on their head, that's a symbol there. If they pat a child on the head for approval, that's interfering with that child's spiritual nature, and they are offended. The OK sign that you and I do, where you put your thumb and forefinger together, in the Asian culture, that means you're a zero. You're a zero. So you need to be aware of the cultures that are going on in the countries or the cities and such. You might want to video yourself to analyze what type of nonverbal feedback you're giving to the students. I've had students tell me where you look like you're mad all the time, and it's not that I'm mad. I'm in deep thought. I'm thinking about something or what I need to do or whatever. But I gave that impression to them that I was mad, and I wasn't mad. But so I needed to notice that about myself and change that. So nonverbal feedback is just as important as feedback in general. So we finished feedback. Now we're going to the next section that's talking about considering the personal needs of the students. There's a big diverse population out there in our classes now, and that's good. You want to encourage creativity amongst your students and allow the students to make educational decisions. But we have basically four variables that I want you to know when teaching for diversity. You have your race, you have your social class, you have gender, and you have ability. So these are the four variables to consider when teaching for diversity. When teaching to a diverse group, we already talked about the four major variables of diversity, but these are 7 suggestions or several issues that you can take into consideration that I want you to know. Number 1, help those students learn about the similarities and differences among the cultures. Number 2, encourage the students to understand that people from similar cultures share common values, common customs, common beliefs. Number 3, make the children aware of acts of discrimination and teach them ways to deal with inequity and prejudice. Number 4, help children develop pride in their family's culture. Number 5, teach children ways to communicate effectively with other cultures, races, and genders. Number 6, instill respect for all people, regardless of their race or gender or social class or ability. And number 7, integrate multicultural activities in your curriculum. I love to teach different cultures whenever the Olympics are going on. Wherever country the Olympics are in, you can incorporate that into your classroom or in PE, and that's your opportunity to expose them to different cultures. Okay, let's talk about gender differences. Teachers greatly influence how their children learn to behave. For example, I want you to know teachers pay more attention to boys and encourage them more. But teachers also give more praise for achievement to boys in PE because girls usually don't care about PE, and that's not true, but teachers interpret it that way. And teachers call on girls less often than they call on boys. So what's that's telling us as teachers? If you call on a boy for an answer in class, then you need to call on a girl for answer in a class, and you need to alternate. In PE, the same thing. They also say teachers also respond to inappropriate behavior from boys and girls in different ways. We tolerate aggression in boys, but we don't tolerate it with girls. But disruptive talking is tolerated more in girls than in boys. Boys are reprimanded more than girls. Teachers use more physical means of disciplining boys. So there's a gender difference there. So what are some teaching behaviors that we want to minimize to help minimize stereotyping by gender? Reinforce the performance of all the students, regardless of their gender. Provide activities that are developmentally appropriate and allow all of them to succeed. Design your programs that ensure success for co-educational experiences. Do not use and do not allow stereotypical comments like, you throw like a girl. I was offended, and I'd like to have them say, well, how does a girl throw? Why, a girl can throw just as hard as a guy. But anyway, that's just don't allow that, because some of the kids could get offended by it. We got some more to do, some more ways to minimize teaching behaviors on the next slide. Make sure to include activities in the curriculum that cut across the typical gender stereotyping. Like we talked about boys, getting them to do rhythmic activities, and maybe girls could be doing the flag football and such. Arrange activities so that the more aggressive and the skilled students do not dominate. Arrange your practice sessions so that all the students receive equal amounts of practice time, and expect all boys and girls to perform equally well. Remember, they do not have the actual muscle formation until later on. It's still in elementary. They all are performing fairly equally, so expect all to perform equally well. Effective lesson also includes more than just what's planned. You want to allow your students to have opportunities for creative expression. So, I want you to know that self-discovered concepts are often better retained and retrieved for future use. If you allow what I call, and it was stated in the old book, but they don't have it in this book, free exploration. 15, 30 seconds, maybe a minute or 2 minutes max. Let them see what they can do with a hula hoop. Let them see what they can do with the scoops and balls. Let's see what they can do with the bean bags. But just let them discover something, and they'll retain that better than some of the things that you've taught them. So we want to encourage creativity. Set aside a little bit of time. It doesn't have to be long, and just say, see what you can do. Let me see what you can do with the hula hoop. That's creativity. In PE, as well as in the classroom, but more so in PE because they're actually doing things and moving, we want to teach them how to make decisions. Decision making is a large part of learning how to behave responsibly. But responsibility is a learned skill that takes practice. So, the decision-making process actually involves learning the consequences of your decisions. This is a life lesson. This is not just a PE lesson on how to make decisions. This is life. This is life. This is how it is. And what you need to realize, when these students are allowed to make decisions at a young age, the incorrect decisions result in much less serious consequences. And it offers them an opportunity to learn. But they are learning consequences. They have to learn consequences. So you want to give them the opportunity to make decisions and choose from some alternatives, even if they make poor choices. So what are some strategies that I want you to know that can help students to learn to make decisions in a safe environment in PE? Number one, you want to limit the number of choices. Limit the number of choices. If you have a new class, you know very little about them, make sure you limit their choices when teaching a new unit or an activity. Number two, let the students modify the activities. This will help reduce the pressure because the teacher no longer has to make exceptions and listen to them saying, oh, it's too hard or I'm bored. So how can we modify activities? You might use a slower moving ball rather than a handball. You might have more fielders out there playing the game. You might lower the basket. You might shorten the distance. So these are some ways that we can modify the activities. Remember, it's all about them being successful. And then number three, I want you to know you need to offer open-ended tasks. Open-ended tasks. So this approach offers a wide latitude for making decisions. You decide the educational outcome you want, and the students determine how to reach it. For example, let them develop a game that requires 4 passes before a shot on the goal. This could be soccer, this could be basketball, but they have to have 4 passes. They have to come up with a solution to it. They could design a jump roping routine that involves a long rope, 4 people, and 2 pieces of manipulative equipment. You didn't say what type of equipment, but manipulative equipment. So this enables them to be creative, and they have to come up with it together as a group. We want our students to develop positive attitudes. In the performing arts, which is physical education, music, and drama, these are the areas where we can offer opportunities for the affective domain, where they can learn to share, express their feelings, set personal goals, or function independently. We can teach the whole person. In physical education, it is very effective because we can teach or address the whole person, not just the physical skills. That's why it breaks my heart when schools do not have physical education. It's not just about physical skills. It's also learning how to get along with one another. If somebody has anger issues, how to express their feelings without becoming so angry. So when planning, you want to analyze whether your lesson will result in experiences that can actually help the students develop positive attitudes. The teacher's attitude, not the lesson plan, but the teacher's attitude actually fosters positive feelings towards the activity. The attitudes and values that we talk about in the affective domain, that this is what the students form, and this is based partly on how their teacher and the peers treat them. So I want you to know, in order for us to enhance the affective domain, how you teach is as important as what you teach. How you teach is as important as what you teach. Treat them with courtesy and respect, the golden rule. Learn to listen without taking it personally or making any type of negative judgments about the students when they are honest. And elementary students are so honest. They might tell you things that you don't want to hear because you're already having a bad day. But then again, they can be so cute also. So we want to develop positive attitudes amongst our students. To finish off this section about considering the personal needs of the students, let's talk about how we can personalize our instructions. Yes, most of our instruction is a group activity, but we also know the ability level of those students vary from what did we say, a 2 to 3 year variance? Okay. Some of these students may be involved in Little League or YMCA or private tutoring. So in the PE class, you have a wide range of experiences amongst those students. So what are some ways that we can personalize our instruction and accommodate for all these different developmental levels? Number one, I want you to know, modify the conditions. I want you to know you can adjust your tasks and activities to help all the children succeed. If the students are learning to catch, you might have some partners closer together. You might have them use a slower moving object, such as a beach ball or a balloon. You might have a larger target. You might change the boundaries. And those who are excelling, you can keep them further apart or with the smaller ball. As long as you're trying to minimize error and maximize success, go for it. Number two, use self-competition. It may surprise you, but if the success rate is too high, students become bored. They can't achieve it. So ask them to set their own personal goals. See if they can beat their own personal best. They respond best to challenges that are personal and slightly above their current skill level. And then number three, you want to offer different task challenges. During your lesson, allow them to work on different tasks. You might have task cards at stations. You might present several tasks of varying complexity. Just depends on the students. If a student has very limited upper body strength, they're going to have a very difficult time to do anything with the upper body. So you might change it up and have them do more with the legs and the lower body. So different tasks, as long as they're moving over 50% of the time. This next little section talks about how to employ effective communication skills. Your students are going to want to communicate openly and honestly with you as an adult. So when you're talking with students, you might want to assume a pose that shows that you're interested and you're paying attention. For instance, kneeling down or just stooping down to be eye level with the students shows them that you care and you're truly interested in what they have to say. So here are some 7 suggestions I want you to know on how you can establish some type of positive bond with the students. Number 1, focus on the specific behavior, rather than making general comments that are personal and insulting. I can't say enough about this first one. Talk about the behavior to the students, not about them as a person. For instance, an example, talking when I am talking is unacceptable behavior. That tells the students that what they are doing is unacceptable. You said nothing about them as a person, how you don't like them, or I can't believe you talking again type of thing. Just focus on the behavior. Identify that specific misbehavior and then state the type of behavior you expect of them, rather than insulting them and embarrassing them. Number 2, we need to understand from the child's viewpoint. Remember when you were little. Remember when you were embarrassed. What did you like or not like? So when you're suggesting ways to improve performance, you want to do so privately and allow them to practice without scrutiny and without embarrassing them. Number 3, identify your feelings about the learner. You might have some feelings and you might be sending mixed messages. If you have some pent-up feelings, you might say some unkind words or sarcastic comment or feedback about their skill. So you may need to communicate how you feel, even if it is negative, but make sure that such communication is directed at specific correctable behavior, the behavior in a caring manner. The tone of your voice, rather than being stern and so forth, soft with the student, letting them know you care about them. Number 4, accentuate the positive. You want to emphasize the positive performance rather than incorrect actions. For instance, a good example would be to say something like land lightly rather than don't land so hard. Focus on the positive rather than the negative. Number 5, optimize your speech patterns. Avoid giving sermons. Sermons seldom work in the teaching environment. And so I want you to know, if you're frustrated with the students, sometimes a period of silence can be effective because it's going to give those students time to digest the information you just said. Number 6, conduct lengthy discussions in a classroom setting. When they're in PE, they're able to move around, and they are so excited to move around because they've been sitting still in the classroom. If you have to do a lengthy explanation concerning some PE situation, you either need to make them sit down, or you do so in the classroom, like maybe the rules or the definitions or terms or strategy and so forth. I personally just let them sit down. Number 7, Respect the student opinion. Avoid humiliating a child who gives a wrong answer. Figuring out how to answer a student who gave a completely wrong answer without embarrassing them or offending them. That's huge. You need to learn how to take their consideration them into consideration. How can we be an effective listener? I want you to know effective listening skills are harder to learn than speaking techniques. Listening skills are harder to learn than speaking techniques. Many students view teachers as people who speak but do not listen. I love the saying, you were given 2 ears and 1 mouth so you could listen twice as much as you speak. I love it. So, what are the following examples or ideas that I want you to know to promote effective listening skills? Number 1, you want to be an active listener. You want to convince the speaker that you are interested in what they have to say. Your nonverbal behavior, such as eye contact, are you looking the person in the eye? Nodding your head in agreement? Any type of facial expression? Moving toward the speaker? These are all examples of showing you are actively listening. Number 2, listen to the hidden message of the speaker. If you have a child that says, I hate PE, beware. They may not really hate PE, but maybe they don't like what you're doing in PE and they're not successful at it and they don't want to be embarrassed, so they don't want to do it. Acknowledge it and let them know that you're going to help them. We're not going to be on this for very long, just this week, and it'll be okay. There's things that others don't like as well, but chances are they can't get it. They don't know how to jump rope. They're getting frustrated, and so they'll just say, I hate PE. But look and figure out what's the hidden message they're really trying to say. Number 3, paraphrase what the student said. Restate in your own words what was said to you. When you do this, it helps to clarify some things, and it helps for the student when you say, did I hear you say you hate PE? Is this correct? And then maybe they'll soften up and realize how frustrated they are. Number 4, let the students know you value listening. Teachers who listen to students learn about their students' feelings. Just be careful. If you find it difficult to accept such feedback from students, because they're going to be brutally honest sometimes, they may throw out some criticism there, it's best to ask the students to keep their comments to themselves. You might want to avoid such interactions if the feedback will affect your confidence. So 4 very good suggestions on how to be an effective listener, not just as a teacher, but as a person. The last section in Chapter 6 talks about how we can evaluate our instructions. I want you to know evaluating how you teach is every bit as important as monitoring how you treat your students. So this section is going to talk about the importance of finding ways to evaluate your teaching. Without a regular and measurable means of checking how you teach, becoming a better teacher is nearly impossible. You're going to have to rely on friends or videos to help you to figure out how you're teaching. So the first step you want to do is select a teaching behavior to evaluate, and then decide how you will record and monitor the data. This section offers you several forms. So I want you to know There are many ways to gather data about your teaching. The students who are not participating could possibly gather the data. Another teacher could gather the data, or you could record your lesson. So I want you to know self-evaluation is important, and it's more likely to reveal your actual teaching behavior. Your teaching behavior. So, what are the different teaching behaviors that you might want to evaluate? Up here is listed instructional time. Basically, we're saying, how much time did you devote to instructions? You only have 30 minutes. So you're going to want to record how many seconds, hopefully it's only seconds, out of that 30-minute lesson. Somebody's going to record when you're talking, when you're giving instructions, how long are those episodes? They should be short and frequent. And like I said, the next PowerPoint is going to have a picture of an example of how you would do it. Another area that I want you to know is management time. This is about the episodes that occur when the students are moving into the various formations that you need them to move into, including when they have to get equipment or put it away, when they're given directions, or about the areas where they need to go. So a general rule is, if you're talking and not giving them instructions, you are managing the students. So this also talks about how many seconds, hopefully seconds, you are doing. Because like in the instructional time, your goal is to limit your episodes to 30 seconds or less when giving instructions. And you'll see on the form given that it shows what percentage of the time of the 30 minutes you were actually spent on giving instructions. The management time, the same thing. Another area that you could do is called practice time, which means how much time are the students on task as opposed to dead time. So practice time or time on task is often referred to as academic learning time in physical education, ALT-PE. Academic learning time in PE. So the practice time is the amount of time that students are actually spending practicing skills that result in them accomplishing your objective. So your duration is most often used for evaluating. So this should be minutes, hopefully, seconds and minutes. So you want to strive to increase this amount of time. You want more time in this. And I'll have one on practice time for you to see as well. Response latency. What is that? I want you to know what that is. Response latency is the amount of time it takes for students to respond to your instructions or your management tasks. For instance, I want you to know you're going to record the amount of time that elapses between the moment a command is given to when the student actually begins or stops. That lapse in time is response latency. So the average duration can be calculated. After more than a 5-second response latency, most teachers become uneasy and expect the class to respond faster. So this is another area that could help you become a better teacher. And then the fifth one is student performance. The percentage of students performing a desired task is an excellent indicator of a well-managed class. You have a play check recording is a technique that's used to observe the group behavior at different times during a lesson. What happens is at regular intervals, while you're reviewing a video of your class, you scan the class from left to right, and you record the number of students who are not performing the desired behavior. Hopefully, that's a smaller number. Each student in the class is observed only once during that scan. You don't want to go back and forth, just observe them once. This play check technique is used to monitor behavior that is a yes or no in nature. Are they doing it or are they not doing it? Okay. So now we'll show some slides on the actual form that would be used for each one of these 5. So here's an example of a form that can be used whenever you're wanting to work on limiting your instructional time. Notice on it you have your name as a teacher, then who's observing you, what period it is, what grade it is, the date and time. It's a basketball lesson, first class meeting on the unit. It started at 9:30, ended at 10 o'clock, so it's a 30-minute lesson. So notice 15 seconds, 10 seconds, 8 seconds is how much time you spent on instruction. So if you count it all up, you had 15 episodes of giving instructions. So your total instruction time, if you add up all those seconds, well, 1 minute and 3 seconds, is a total of 5 minutes and 12 seconds. So if you divide that by your 30 minutes, you come up with 17% of the time, so less than 1/4 of the time the student you're giving instructions, which is good because we want at least half of the time or more where the students are engaged in the activity. So you spend about 20 seconds on each, the average length of the episode, but you took less than 20% of the time. That's awesome. So here's a form that can be used to gather information or to help you to become more of an effective teacher by noticing how much time are you spending moving the students into their various formations or getting them, the students to gather their equipment or put away their equipment or giving them directions and such. So again, all the pertinent information is at the top. And then we had 14 episodes here for an average about 20 seconds each, where you actually were giving the students instructions on how to get into formation or something about the equipment. Okay, so again, it's a 30-minute lesson. Less than 5 minutes was spent totally out of the 30 minutes where the students were actually getting equipment or getting into formation. So 16% of the time. So the previous one was 17%. This is 16%. So we're up to 33% of the time. That's 1/3 of a 30-minute lesson. So 1/3, that's about 10 minutes. Okay, so 10 minutes is spent between giving instructions and you managing the students. So remember, we want more than 15 minutes where the students are actually being active and participating. Here's a form that can be used for actually having the students on task, practice time, time on task. So you want a large percentage. This is where you want over 50% of the time, over 15 minutes of the 30 minutes, where the students are actually doing skills. So here you have all this time. It's still in seconds because we can tell by some it's a minute 55, a minute 39, a minute 17. Okay, so when a total of 20 minutes here out of a 30-minute lesson, so that's good. Almost 60% is actually teaching. Actually time on task for the students where they are practicing. So if you want to become a better teacher, some of these others you could also do in the classroom as well. Okay, or what are you doing with the students? But this is mainly geared for PE. Another example that I have not talked about is instructional feedback. If you look on page 120 and 121, they talk about all the different areas that could be evaluated. For instance, one area that you could evaluate could be praise and criticism. Feedback can either be positive and constructive, or it can be negative and critical. So you would tally the occurrences of praise and criticism, and with this information, you can set goals for increasing the number of comments maybe per minute. Another area that you could do would be general versus specific feedback. Feedback to students can be general or specific. Remember, we talked about that good job, good job, good job, or way to go, way to go, way to go. That would be examples of general feedback. But if you give them, in contrast, you might give them specific feedback and tell them specifically, that's the way to tuck your head under. You would count how many times. Which one do you want to do? Do you want general or specific? Or are you going to evaluate both this time? But I would just pick one. Corrective instructional feedback which focuses on improving the student's performance. Should be specific so that they know what they must correct. This is another area that you could possibly evaluate on yourself. Nonverbal feedback, patting the students on the back or giving them a wink or a smile or a nod or a thumbs up, clapping of the hands. And then we have our nonverbal feedback that could be negative. A frown, shaking your head in disapproval, walking away from the student, or laughing at a poor performance. But what's suggested is this: if you're going to do instructional feedback, you would want to record your lesson. Record your lesson to play back and evaluate later. At first, you would just take one category at a time and use it and come up with a form like this that you see here. Notice they have interactions unrelated to skill performance. Are you praise and criticism? Praise would be a positive thing. Criticism would be a negative. General instruction feedback, we talked about that, general or specific. Then we talked about corrective feedback. So pick one and watch the whole video and do it, and then come back and do the others. Maybe learning their first names at first when you do it. Analyze the use of first names that you actually use during the 30-minute video, and then go back and do these others, the nonverbal feedback. So you have all the 4 or 5 different areas there. So then you would go ahead and do your ratio of positive to negative. So this would be a non-embarrassing type of thing for you to know how you could improve as a teacher. What are some takeaways we can take from Chapter 6? Our instructional practices can greatly affect the overall success of our PE program. Positive feedback is the most effective way to develop positive attitudes towards the activities and skills you're teaching. Your instruction is best when it is personalized and offers something of value to each individual. And then we have systematic evaluations as an effective way to improve our own teaching practice without being evaluated by someone else.